From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. Here's some food for thought. What would you say if I told you that more new restaurants opened than closed in Toronto during the pandemic? While there is no doubt that restaurants have been hard hit during the pandemic, that is what a researcher found by looking at the data. As the province gets closer to reopening, people will be looking to return to their favorite spots and try to embrace the normalcy of going out for the night and enjoying a meal. But how has the GTA's restaurant scene already changed during the pandemic? And what is it going to look like when the lockdown is truly over? To discuss that, we'll be joined by Karon, a food reporter at The Star. But first, we will be talking with Shauna Brail, who is an urban planner and economic geographer and an associate professor at the University of Toronto. She joins us to talk about this intriguing restaurant data that she found. Shauna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, as I was just telling you, I think this project is really fantastic because you have created these dashboards that can visually represent some of the changes that have happened because of the pandemic. Tell us a little bit about the Toronto After the First Wave project.
Absolutely. So, Toronto After the First Wave is a sort of a research project that's very public facing in nature. As you can see, it's got a website, torontoafterthefirstwave.com. And the genesis of the project is that I was seized by all of the disruption and changes and claims to the devastating impact that COVID-19 was having on urban life and public life in cities. And given just how long we've endured, living with a pandemic, I wanted to do a sort of in-depth look at different elements of our city and how we might be able to look at using data to show an accurate picture of what changes were underfoot, whether some of those were positive, some clearly negative and harmful, and also to be able to say with a little bit more certainty what we might expect for the future of Toronto and of cities post-pandemic.
So this covers a lot, but since many of us think with our stomachs, I really want to talk about the restaurants portion. I want to talk about some of the findings, and let's start with the one that I find the most counterintuitive. From your look at the data, more restaurants have opened than closed during the pandemic. Tell me a little bit about that.
This was truly a surprising finding for our whole team. And we did this data and we did this analysis in sort of two time periods. The first one was from May 2020 to November 2020. And there was a lot of interest in it because between May and November, we also found just a moderately greater number of restaurants open than closed, seeming to fly in the face of suggestions and, knowledge about how the pandemic would affect spending. The fact that eating indoors and even outdoors has been shut down for most of this period, claims by, restaurant associations that something like half of all independently owned restaurants could close as a result of the closure of indoor and outdoor dining. And the numbers didn't bear this up. The numbers said actually slightly more open than closed. And when we sort of look at the bigger picture of what's happening in restaurants, and my expertise on restaurants is that I eat 3 meals a day. I am not a restaurant expert by any means, but I am someone who has studied cities and the cultural economy of cities for a very long time, and restaurants are a big piece of this. And if we sort of think about it, then what we begin to realize is that a lot of the shifts around digitization, so both from the very beginning, from the menu piece of restaurants, of how one orders from a restaurant, to the way in which people receive their meals. Is there a platform firm that's operating a network that's delivering your meal? Is there some other kind of delivery service? And then finally, it's a question of innovation and entrepreneurship and survival, to be honest. And so by sort of the very virtue of the fact that there weren't a lot of choices for many people, figuring out a way to pivot food services and food delivery during the pandemic is in many respects a sign of success. And so we ran this again thinking, will we see the same thing? And we saw when we ran the data from November 2020 to May 2021, confirmed that actually there were slightly more openings than closures of restaurants during this time. And when we look around the city, we see that, in many neighborhoods, the bulk of restaurants have somehow managed to survive. And it is this kind of mix of digitization and, resilience and entrepreneurship and thinking about how do we change our menu to make it more takeout friendly? How do we appeal to campaigns for buying local, which I think have been really helpful? But there's been a devastating impact on employment for sure. So at the same week that we released this most recent restaurant dashboard, the City of Toronto released their Toronto Employment Survey, which showed that the greatest loss of jobs in the city in the past year was in the service industry, and 20,000 jobs were lost in restaurants as the greatest proportion of that. So while it's a story of resilience for restaurants and the way in which they have survived, it's not right now a story of success in terms of creating jobs and employment.
This is super interesting. What else did you find about the kind of restaurants that opened? I think you mentioned that obviously there had to be a push to takeout and delivery, but I think there were also some interesting finds about the sorts of cuisines that we gravitated to. What did you find?
So what we found in terms of the cuisines that were new, that sort of newly opened restaurants, is that we saw a pivot to fast food, to food that is very amenable to takeout. Pizza, sandwiches, sushi bars, those are really high up on the list here. Mexican food, burgers, gluten-free actually turns up as an area in which there's been more takeout or more restaurant activity, and also Indian food. Those ones are sort of the most prominent in terms of newly opened.
In terms of where they opened to, in that data, what are we looking at?
Again, like a great question, because we've heard a lot about the sort of hollowing out of the downtown core of the city, particularly the central business district and the condo-focused neighborhoods. So there's been this sense, and these questions around, are people leaving the city because it's no longer a great place to be? And because proximity is challenging in an era where we have this pandemic that is spread through close physical proximity. And yet when we look at the data, and I've looked, we break it down both by downtown and the rest of the neighborhoods, but then we also can look at individual neighborhoods downtown. There isn't a larger proportion of closings than openings in downtown Toronto as a whole. There isn't a single neighborhood even that has seen a sort of massive devastation of its restaurant scene. So downtown saw in the period of, and this is the full year, May 2020 to May 2021, 214 new restaurants open. And even if we look, at one of the neighborhoods, and these are Yelp-based categories, but one of the neighborhoods is a condo-focused neighborhood, an area around the CN Tower, King and Spadina, Harbourfront West, saw 39 new restaurants open at that time. And there is no neighborhood downtown that saw a significant number of closures over openings. So even, downtown Toronto and around Central Bay Street, 19 new restaurants. Now we'd have to go further into the data to see what kind of restaurants were these, right? If they're sit-down restaurants, they're restaurants that were planned in advance and decided to open with the sort of knowledge that opening is coming. It looks like it's closer on the horizon now than it did a month ago, but we still don't know. But, we're still seeing new openings in every neighborhood.
Okay, you mentioned it, but we should say this. This data comes from Yelp, right? So there's some caveats there. Now, of course, I do think that there's plenty of foodies finding all the places to eat. But that's the one grain of salt, right? This information is as good as the data, right?
Definitely. The information is as good as the data. We did a lot of searching of the data to try to sort of understand and balance that we were sure that the data was accurate. But one thing to know is that not every restaurant is listed on Yelp, and that there may be restaurants that have closed that are not listed, although we did go through and do a check and it was quite accurate, but it is not perfect, but it is really helpful.
So how do you think this is going to change our city's dining scene as it opens up?
That's a great question. That's the billion-dollar question, right? We know that as things are reopening, that there is a desire for people to return to gathering. And restaurants are just a wonderful place to gather in Toronto before the pandemic. And even during the pandemic has continued to have a thriving food scene and an exciting sort of food scene. I would imagine that we will absolutely see a desire to return to dining. Some people will be less cautious than others, right, in terms of whether they want to sit indoors or outdoors when those open. Will we see a sort of decline in some of the faster food takeout options? Maybe. But the other thing I see happening, and that happened at least in my own household during the pandemic, is it was exhausting to make meals. 3 meals a day for 5 people and feed the dog. And we definitely relied on takeout more than we used to. And we were a little bit more adventurous in where we ate and in what we ate. And that was fun. And I hope that continues, because that was a really nice way to connect with different places and different businesses.
So Shauna, where are you and your family going for that first meal in a restaurant?
I wasn't prepared for this question. Well, this is not a restaurant, but I did find one of those ghost kitchen places that makes like the most amazing Mexican fish tacos. And I love fish tacos. And we are going to that place. Should I tell you what it's called?
Of course.
It's called Classico. And we are going there and getting fish tacos and going to the park. Even if a restaurant's open, we're still doing that.
Well, that sounds great. Shauna, is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that our listeners should know?
Well, the other thing I would say, and I've said it already, but one of the most important things that this dashboard initiative has done for me, and in terms of the sharing of information and the data that we collected, is it provided a source of hope and opportunity for a future post-pandemic. And we really need that now. We're getting closer to it, but knowing actually that we will be returning to a city in which our sort of urban life continues and has changed over time, but continues to thrive, really matters to me.
I think it matters to a lot of us. That's a great note to end on. I really, really want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It was wonderful to speak with you.
That was Shauna Brail, who is an urban planner, an economic geographer, and an associate professor at the University of Toronto. We'll be right back. We are now joined by Karon Liu, a food reporter at The Star. Karon, thanks once again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with this data. What surprised you about the findings?
Well, I think with all the talk about, restaurants being in danger of closing and seeing a lot of empty storefronts, I was kind of surprised that the number of openings slightly edged out the number of closings. Not to minimize the plight that a lot of restaurant owners and restaurant workers are going through, but yeah, I'm kind of surprised that so many places opened over the last year.
Totally surprised by that, but the other thing, not surprised, is about what's popular. Really practical takeout food. Pizzas, burgers, fried chicken. These things are basically recession-proof, right?
Yeah, there's always talk about comfort foods in times like these. Foods that are filling, foods that aren't really fancy, foods that are affordable. It's kind of what people crave from the consumer side. Now, on the production side, these are also foods that are relatively easier to make. They don't require as many steps. The ingredients aren't as expensive. They can be kind of made on a production line and can be quickly assembled for a lower overhead. It just kind of makes sense. So I'm not surprised that more of these foods are being available out there right now.
It does still seem a little bit weird to me considering what a diverse city Toronto is. I mean, aren't you a little bit surprised like that?
So it depends where these places are opening. I find that a lot of the pizza places, the fried chicken sandwiches places, I find that that's more concentrated in the downtown core, especially in places that have more of a sit-down restaurant scene. That's kind of where I've been seeing a lot more of those new menus being popped up. Up here where I am in North York, there isn't as much of that because a lot of the restaurants up here do already offer takeout. And I think up here, because up here in the Burrs, patio culture isn't that much of a thing. We already have a very strong takeout culture. So you're not seeing as many of those pizza and burger places pop up here.
Okay, I think maybe you're going to have to explain what they are first, but ghost kitchens have been a really big deal. First off, what are they? And then the question is are they going to be something that sticks around?
Ghost Kitchens is basically a restaurant that doesn't have a dine-in space. It's basically just a production kitchen meant to produce foods for delivery and takeout. The food's being made in a commercial kitchen, but all the food is meant for delivery apps or takeout. Like you don't sit down and eat. So a lot of those have been popping up in the last year just because indoor dining is no longer a thing and delivery has really taken off. The question is if they'll continue to open up at the rate that they currently are after the pandemic. And I think it will teeter off a little bit because there is this pent-up demand from a lot of people to be able to sit down at a restaurant. I think they'll still be around. I don't think that they'll be gone forever, but I don't think that they'll be opening up at the rate that they are now.
So this is one of those trends where there have been a lot of people in the food industry, maybe sous chefs, other places where, it's their passion project is they've opened up these places. A lot of them are getting really popular on Instagram and using social media and word of mouth. Now, the thing is one of the people you talk to is that there's some hope that these people are going to actually sort of grow up and open up a new wave of places. And there's obviously a bunch of restaurants that have closed, so it's sort of a turnkey solution. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so in the last year, especially, a lot of people, home cooks, furloughed chefs, furloughed professional cooks, have started to sell their food over Instagram, WhatsApp group, Facebook groups, because there's no restaurant to cook out of. And in turn, they've gotten a big following. And the thing is, at the end of the day, most of these operations aren't approved by public health because a lot of times they're cooking out of their personal kitchens at home, which is not a commercially licensed kitchen. So in order to kind of take the next step, a lot of these home cooks want to go legitimate. And by doing that is to move their business to an actual brick and mortar retail space with a commercial kitchen that has like the Dine Safe green sign so that they can sell to the public. We've seen a lot of restaurants close, but this could be an opportunity for these home cooks to move into these spaces that already have the kitchen set up, and the places just might need a fresh coat of paint or a little bit of decorating. So it's a lower entry cost than before to go from an Instagram business to an actual retail storefront.
Okay, here's a big question. What do you think the dining scene is going to be like when it reopens?
To be honest, I don't think it's going to be that different from what it was like before in terms of the variety of restaurants and the types of dining available. I've been keeping track of what's happening in the US, where a lot of cities are already in the reopening phase or, didn't even close anything to begin with. And there's still a lot of different types of restaurants opening. There's still fine dining. There's still 100, 200 seat restaurants. There's still big quick service chains. There's a lot of mom and pop shops also opening in tiny places. There's still a bit of everything. And that's what one of the restaurant consultants that I spoke with for this article told me about when I asked what kinds of prospective clients or inquiries that he's been getting. He was saying that, maybe if you asked me 6 months ago, it'll be a lot more quick service delivery concepts. But now that more and more people are getting vaccinated in Ontario, there's a bigger confidence among restaurateurs that people will want to go out again and maybe not order the same takeout food that they've been getting for last year, year and a half. So there's a lot more confidence that any kind of restaurant would be able to survive after the pandemic.
Any idea what the hot new trend will be? And I mean, other than actually going out to a place for dinner, which is going to be the thing that everybody does. Any ideas?
Trends as in actual foodstuffs?
Whatever you got. Yeah, sure.
I have no idea. I've been sitting in my house for the last year and a half. I think your guess is as good as mine. I think it's kind of a time will tell situation in terms of just seeing what people as they emerge from their houses will want to eat. Right now, a lot of the restaurants are kind of just serving their best ofs dishes in order to just pay the bills right now. Few places are doing a lot of experimentation or introducing new things because, they don't have the money to do that. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a wait when indoor dining returns, when patio dining returns, to see anyone really kind of testing the waters on what the next popular dish or dining trend will be in the city.
Listen, I follow you on Instagram. I know basically you can eat everything and anything. Is there a restaurant that you've pegged that you would like to go to as soon as you can to eat indoors?
Oh, so many. I miss sitting down for dim sum. I've been getting takeout a lot. Takeout dim sum. My parents love to go to Sky Fusion up in Markham. That's their favorite spot right now. But I miss sitting down at a dim sum place. I miss sitting down at a sushi place to get a omakase. Even just going to a bar like Bar Volo. I don't even drink, but I miss just sitting at a bar, nursing my, 4% shandy for like an hour with friends. Like, I think that's the thing that I miss the most. It doesn't matter even what kind of food that they're serving. I just miss sitting down at a restaurant with friends and family. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss as well. That social aspect that's very intertwined with the dining out experience.
I completely agree with you. Well, I'll be honest, I can't wait to have a child-free dinner with my wife at a nice place. So much as I love my kid, but let me get a babysitter. Let me use my parents as her babysitter again. Let's get to that point.
You know what I do miss, though, is the diner breakfast. I miss my brown toast with a little bit of butter, a side of bacon and eggs. The eggs, always scrambled. And I love the diner eggs because they're always a little bit drier than what you would make at home. And just sitting at the counter, drinking a coffee. Again, I don't drink coffee, but I always drink coffee with the all-day breakfast. That's something I really, really miss. Even though I can make it all at home, I don't know. There's just something about the all-day breakfast platter at a diner that you cannot recreate that experience at home.
Listen, I'm totally a brunch man as well, Karan. This has been fabulous for us. I want to thank you so much for your time, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Karan Liu is a food reporter at The Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajin Buddher, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.